Thank you for those talks. So Africa is undergoing a digital revolution. There are 200 million people connected to the web in the continent, and many of them are on mobiles first. So how are all these people using the web, and what does the future hold? That's the topic of the next panel, which is entitled The Web, A View from Africa, and it's chaired by Anne Jellema, Chief Executive Officer of the World Wide Web Foundation. So please welcome her and her panel to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Anne Jellema. I'm the CEO of the World Wide Web Foundation, which is one of the organizations behind the Web We Want campaign. And we have a fantastic all-star panel today to talk about how is the web changing Africa and how is Africa changing the web. And really we want to leave a lot of time for audience questions and conversation between the panel and the audience. So I'm going to be pretty strict with my panelists. I know some of them can talk. I'm going to ask them not to talk too much so that there's plenty of time for you to also ask them your questions. So I'd like to get just a quick first impressions from each of you on exactly that question. From your perspective, from your experience, how do you see the web changing Africa, and how do you see Africa changing the web? So let me start with Edetaen Ojo, who's the Director of Media Rights Agenda in Nigeria, which is an organization dedicated to promoting excellence and professionalism in journalism. He helped to spearhead the fight for freedom of information laws in Nigeria, successfully so. The Freedom of Information Act was passed in Nigeria thanks to his efforts and those of his colleagues. And he's now at the forefront of a very interesting coalition that's come together to create an African Declaration of Internet Rights and Freedoms, which we're going to hear a little bit more about later in the panel. But Edetaen, first from you, how do you see the web changing Africa and vice versa?
Thank you very much, Anne. I think it's a bit of a paradox. On the one hand, a lot of people are getting online in Africa, most of them through mobile phone technology. But at the same time, I think it's accentuating some of the divisions in Africa, especially the divisions between the young and the older generation, who basically are being left behind. A lot of young people are online, but most of the older generation remain very much in the analog age, and that appears to be increasing. We're also seeing some divisions in the gender disparities online, which is, I think, being heightened from what we also see offline. So in some ways, it's an exciting era where a lot of people are enjoying new communication technologies and doing a lot of things that a decade ago seemed far-fetched. But on the other, one worries about the slow pace at which a lot of people are getting online outside of the urban areas and among the older generations.
Thanks, Edetaen. Nnenna Nwakanma is my colleague at the Web Foundation. She says she comes from the internet, but the way this woman travels, I think she actually comes from the airport most of the time. She lives in Abidjan. She's originally from Nigeria. She's worked in the ICT sector for a very long time in Africa. She's the co-founder of the Free and Open Source Foundation for Africa. And she's now one of the key forces behind the Web We Want campaign, as well as the Alliance for Affordable Internet. So, Nnenna, do you agree with Edetaen's perspective?
Edetaen is older than myself, so maybe that's where the gap comes from. I'm looking forward. I'm from the internet. We are the ones who live and sleep there, who don't power down. One of the things I want to point out about how the web is changing Africa, it's in the free flow of information, that we're not going back anymore. Once information is there, it goes across. So the capacity of Africa to generate its own stories and tell it by our own selves, that is something the web has given us, and we're not going to lose it. 3 years ago, I ran a research for 1 year across West Africa on the importance of social media and citizen engagement in public policy processes. I do believe that the web is forever going to challenge our governance processes. It's beginning, it may not have grown, but I don't see any election in Africa that wouldn't be web motivated these days. Every person who wants a leadership position is speaking to people and using web tools, mostly social media. And citizen engagement. In those days, we couldn't meet face-to-face. We didn't have the transport. That right to assemble was not easy. But with social media, with the internet, with even SMS-based messaging, Africans are mobilizing themselves for issues that are not necessarily political. We have a lot of stories in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, in Nigeria. Africans are mobilizing for each other. They are mobilizing for and against issues. So one thing we can't lose anymore is the power that the web gives us for citizen engagement. And finally, African music, African food, African dressing, Nollywood, all of that has been given a boom by the web. So when I go places now, oh, your name is Nnenna. I watch a Nigerian film with Nnenna. That's me, and that's what the web does.
Thank you. So Eliza Yang is the editor of the Guardian Global Development Professionals Network. She spent some time working for development NGOs, and she had a stint in ethical fashion before that. So Eliza, one of the interesting things about the web and development in Africa is that some of the biggest innovations in the development field have actually come out of African adaptations of technology. I'm thinking about mobile money, Ushahidi, the crowdsourcing platform. Do you think that trend is going to continue?
At the moment, all I'm thinking is I can't really follow what Nnenna said, except I stand up and actually dance. But yeah, I do. I think that I think necessity is the mother of invention, as I was told growing up. So what that means is essentially that Africans are using the net to do unusual things that meet their needs that we don't think about here because we have our needs met in other ways, right? Yeah. And so there's, people talk about it often, the sort of leapfrogging that is happening. It's just broadly more ICTs, more than just the web, but that allows for us to take advantage of tools. I wasn't necessarily even thinking of, when I was thinking about what I had to say for this session, and the playback is really bad, but I was thinking about the potential that the internet has in terms of commerce in Africa, in terms of education, in terms of, as Nnenna was saying, civil engagement. But I was also thinking about the threat, specifically of journalists still being rounded up for things that they're saying online, people not understanding that when you use Facebook as a platform to gather together, that it's actually visible. People can see that, and that actually there are repercussions if you start a gay group or something on Facebook. And so I thought that when I think about the web in Africa, I think about the lack of digital literacy and of people understanding their rights and the results of engaging in this space. I think it holds such potential, but there's less understanding of some of the risks involved.
Right, thank you. And Lulu Kitololo is the co-owner and creative director of Asilia, a creative agency which is based both in London and Nairobi, and has been working with many African brands and organizations, as well as companies seeking to reach African audiences. She's also run a bunch of social media and web workshops at the Southbank Center before, and she's the founder of AfriLove, a blog encouraging creative enterprise in Africa. So Lulu, how about the web and entrepreneurship in Africa?
I think the biggest thing for me is that it's given us access to the world. So exposure, both in terms of us seeing all that's out there and all the opportunities that are out there, but also importantly, given us a platform to showcase what we can offer to the world. And so we're now able to build relationships, create careers, businesses, and industries that previously weren't viable, because now we don't only have our local markets, we have the whole world to kind of provide our products, services to, and I think that's the greatest part of the web and the kind of biggest equalizing opportunity of the web. And it means that also we are kind of shaping the web as a distribution channel. We're shaping how it can work for us. And a small example is how I see some entrepreneurs in Kenya using Facebook to run their businesses completely. And that's not what it's for, but people are finding ways to use the tools for their specific purposes. And
so again, necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly.
Oh, yes.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So Edda, it sounds like everything is going great. All this innovation is happening, adoption is spreading, people are doing creative things. Why have you just put all this effort into creating the African Declaration of Internet Rights and Freedoms? Why do we need this kind of framework? Tell us a bit about where this comes from.
Well, as I said earlier, a lot of Africans are getting online nationally across the region, most of them young people in the age of social media. And increasingly, people are finding their voices, commenting on political issues and a variety of other issues. But somehow, political leaders across the continent, in almost all the countries, have been panicked by this development. And they're therefore thinking, how do we control this thing that is coming at us with such full force? Many of them don't have the technical or legal competence to navigate the complex issues around regulating the internet. So basically what they've done is turned to other countries where there are existing regulations. Unfortunately, they've turned to the worst examples that we can find in Nigeria and in a number of other countries. So when you look at some of the legislation or draft bills that are pending, you find that they're word for word taken from some other context. The context is completely different, and in many of the cases, the provisions are very repressive. So we started to think of a way of putting together some norms and standards that should guide legislative and policy processes across the continent, both at national level, at the sub-regional level, and continentally. And that was where the idea came of having some sort of guideline that is not a piece of legislation. It doesn't have the force of law, but it's something that could be compelling for African leaders who want to make laws but don't really understand the issues. So after a year of meeting, of planning, of drafting and consultations, we launched in Istanbul, on the margins of the Internet Governance Forum, African Declaration on Internet Rights and Freedoms, basically to serve this need. Now, some people have asked me, are these standards, these norms, are they African norms or are they different from the universal standards? And my response is, the standards that are reflected in the declaration are universal, but what makes it African is three things I would say. One is that it seeks to build on instruments that have been adopted across the continent, so it references some of the instruments that have been previously adopted across the continent relating to free flow of information, access to information, and digital rights. Secondly, it highlights some of the more critical issues around human rights online that are relevant for Africa, dealing with issues of access and affordability, for instance, issues of cultural rights, linguistic diversity. If you go across the African continent, it's very diverse, but online you don't see this cultural and linguistic diversity reflected. And then there are certain calls that are made on key institutions, key African stakeholders to take certain steps and actions to redress that situation. So in those ways, it is very relevant to Africa, but the standards are universal standards that have been applied.
So is this like Sir Tim Berners-Lee was talking yesterday about a Magna Carta for the internet. Is this like a regional Magna Carta, an example of what a regional Magna Carta might look like?
I would describe it in that way. It's a set of principles that try to establish standards which hopefully we can build consensus around on the continent. There's been a lot of consultation on it, and I think it's widely accepted, but we're now looking at governments to engage the process.
Right. Thank you. And what do you see, I mean, you mentioned governments grappling with the kind of opening the floodgates of free flow of information and expression on the web. Do you see censorship as the biggest threat to the development of the web in Africa? You know, what is the biggest threat in your mind that this declaration needs to tackle?
Well, one of the challenges also is that Africa is a very diverse continent. So when you go across countries, you're confronted with different realities. In some countries, censorship is a big issue. In a country like Ethiopia, where bloggers have remained in prison for such a long time simply for posting blogs. Even in Nigeria, where you have a couple of people in prison for making posts on Facebook that are political in nature. So you have that issue in a lot of countries, but there are also other issues which are challenging, for which policy interventions may be required, for instance, around issues of cost and affordability. It's very important that there are policies put in place to make the, access to the internet more affordable. So there are a number of issues that it deals with. Okay. I see now that my presentation has come up. Let me try and put up the link for the declaration in the hope that some people, if not all of you, will access it and read it, and we can have a proper conversation around it.
So Nnenna, you work with the Alliance for Affordable Internet. I think the Alliance put out some research last year that showed that even an entry-level internet package costs as much as 40% of the average person's income in developing countries. Why? Why should it be so expensive? What's going on?
Well, like Edith said, where we come from, we don't have the basic infrastructure. The internet, the tubes, as we call them, some people are still using ADSL, which rides on telephone lines. Some others are using infrastructure that already exists. Like if you have roads, you lay pipes with the roads, where the road runs. But in places where you don't have roads, you don't have anything to lay the pipes on. In this place, you have electricity. So people who are mounting pillars do not have to generate electricity just for that. So basically, the initial investment needed by any company to deploy the internet infrastructure is very high for many of them in Africa. And if you are in business, you invest and users pay back. Now, speaking about entrepreneurship, is there a policy that allows for price to go down? The answer is no. In Africa, in the minds of those born before the computer people who are leading us, the computer is still luxury, and so it's being taxed. In fact, the cell phone, in the country I live in, Cote d'Ivoire, technology stuff are being taxed at 23%. So if you buy a computer, you pay 20% for duty. Then you have to pay for light and all of that. So basically, there is no political will to have a digital economy, to put internet access as part of the economy and invest in it from state level, from national budget. There is also the difficulty of content when you go online. If within the framework that we've talked about now, I earn $200 a month, and I'm removing $20 to buy a data package for 1 week. That's 10% of my salary. What am I getting for the $20 I'm spending? For 20 quid here is nothing to many people. But for 20 quid in Africa, that's a lot of money. And you should not be spending it and not getting value in return. So when people go online and they don't get value in return, they think they've wasted their money. So the content, what we call apps that speak to the people, when they don't get it, they feel the money has been wasted. And of course, their devices, like I said, what you don't know, you are afraid of. So that education, that idea of playing with computers, knowing that this thing doesn't shock, it doesn't kill, you can use it, and that's why we're happy for mobile. Mobile makes it friendly. Computers are big, they look like big screens, they really scare people off. But mobile is good, mobile is easier, and when it comes with a touch, for people like my mother who have to go out in the outhouse, it's really helpful. So people are buying these things that solve their problems. So when it comes with messages, when it comes with mobile money, then it makes sense. But for now, because of the infrastructure, because of the policy, because of the taxation, because of content, it is still high out there. But I work for the Alliance for Affordable Internet. And we are going from Nigeria to Kenya, to Mozambique, to Ghana, and we are knocking on the doors. And we are bringing government, civil society, industry on the same table and saying, how do we do this forward? How do we move forward? What is the issue from the government side? What is the issue from the industry side? What's the issue from the user end? Let's sit together. Let's harmonize. We all want internet access. We all want development for our people. The government needs its taxes. The private sector needs its gains. And the users need to have value. Let's move forward in a multi-stakeholder way. That is what we do. When I say I live on the internet, it means that every single atom in my mind is thinking connectivity, is thinking affordability, is thinking web for all the time.
Do you want to second that thought?
Well, God, there's nothing you can second after Nnenna finished speaking. Yes, well, you know what? To just take it in a slightly different direction, because when I was thinking about today, I was thinking about all the amazing things that can be done and all the organizations like the Web We Want Foundation and what Nnenna does to try and give people that access. But then I thought we should stop for a second, because I hear this thing all the time about the digital divide, which essentially people are talking about access to tools, access to technology, but then access to technology doesn't equate access to information. Right? And I think that if we're looking at the web as a means for people to get information, we're networked, then we should first of all recognize that people in Africa are already networked, yes, and that people are looking for ways to spread information, and this is why they're innovating on mobile phones, because it's easy. And so actually, when we're looking at adapting the web for Africa, we're not just talking about putting computers or faster internet speeds. We're thinking about how can people get access to the information that they need, right? And how can people create more information? I think, Africans trade online, yes, but how much of the domains and the platforms we use, we create ourselves, right? So we're just adding to the traffic of the internet, but we haven't appropriated the internet for ourselves. And so, my thinking was just more about some of the issues. I guess as I'm a journalist, I kind of look for what the interesting story is, right? The interesting story is that actually we haven't quite cracked that access to tools isn't access to information, and that with access to information there's increased risk. And we haven't quite cracked my next big sort of challenge, which I started thinking about a few years ago, which is what's Africa's digital legacy? What are we leaving? And when we're just however many million Africans or billion Africans are on Facebook, Facebook is a commercial site, and it responds to the demands of its stakeholders, not to the Africans who are creating a digital history on Facebook. And so if we do not have platforms that we own, if we're not investing in how do we preserve this history that we're creating in real time, but for the future, right? That's what we're doing on social media. It's actually we're documenting our history in real time, and people in the future will look back and say, oh, this is what was happening, at that particular time. If we're doing so on commercially owned platforms where there is no sort of civil society or policy investment, then we're going to lose our legacy, because if tomorrow they decide that Facebook should no longer be free, or the way they're collecting our data needs to change, then the way we're investing in the way we're building our history online will no longer be owned by us. And so I felt like before we open up to questions, these are just some of the legacy issues I was thinking about.
Great point. So Lulu, one of the things for that African innovation on the web, about the web, with the web to really flourish is about creating an ecosystem of startups and investors who are going to back those innovations. Do you think that's happening already? I mean, do you see examples of that happening, or what more is needed to give it a boost?
I have seen examples where people will start some kind of matchmaking platform where they give showcase to, for example, African app developers, and then, the theories that people looking to invest in those kinds of businesses and people will, but I haven't seen them really succeed and sustain themselves. But kind of, building on what Eliza said, I think what we should be encouraging is for more homegrown investors, for us to invest in each other and create that, for people to appreciate the value of what we can do and invest in that instead of looking to people outside to be the ones to invest in that. And again, tied to what Eliza was saying about it's not just access to the internet, it's everything around that. So thinking of entrepreneurs who want to use the internet as a platform to reach other markets,
right.
We also need the infrastructure to fulfill, our orders. Let's, for an example. So internet shopping, for example, in the West, is made possible because there's a postal system, that works. Now we have to think about, okay, what does that look like for us?
Drones.
And payment systems is another thing. I know a lot of people providing services in Kenya, for example, where PayPal exists, but they can't use that to purchase. And so we have to look at all of these things, how do we make them work in our context and what needs to,
Can I just interject there? Because I think also that sort of contextualizing everything we're talking about. I mean, this panel is about Africa, and there has been one on Latin America and, Asia or whatever, or the Middle East, but we would never have an internet in Europe panel, right? Because the issues are far more, we recognize that they're far more localized than that. And so already, we're starting at a loss because we're talking about this great big continent, which we've already been very clear to say, it's really diverse. But, we know that M-Pesa is working really well in Kenya, and we know that people are struggling to replicate that success.
M-Pesa is the mobile.
M-Pesa is the mobile payment,
system,
mobile money system, mobile payment system, right? And so I think just the way we are still processing, what's his name? An African author whose name I do not remember said, everybody has accepted the sort of all the other continents within them. We've accepted the North America within us and the Asia, but we're still rejecting the Africa. And the moment that we do that, then we can start to have a far more nuanced conversation about what Africa needs and what Africa's problems are. But I think this point about it being localized is so important, and I just, we shouldn't leave here thinking there's just one blanket system and one set of needs. It needs to be localized to every context.
Great. So I'd like to see if there's some questions from the audience. Okay, great. I think there's a microphone coming behind you.